this is the final segment that we will have before we're all back together for our first Wednesday night in months. So I hope you watch this and just get your mind in gear, and we'll be just continuing right through John once we come back next week. So I'm very excited for that, and excited to have all of us back together. Hopefully you took the time and you followed the instructions and you read the entirety of John chapter 9. It's only 41 verses, so it's not that long. If you haven't done it yet, pause and do that. Spend some time in prayer. Get your mind in gear on the passage that we're going to look at. Okay, we're finishing out chapter 9. So over the last couple of segments, we've talked about the purpose of the miracle of Jesus' healing of the blind man and how God uses bad situations for his glory, and that's the case with this man who was formerly blind. And then there's the incredulity at the miracle, all these people who can't believe what's happened. And then there comes to the strife over the miracle, and really that's where the Pharisees come in, and they will not accept what Jesus has done, and they will not accept that Jesus is from God, or that Jesus has power from God. Like, they will not acknowledge it at all. So as we come to these last several verses, and the verses for today is really in verse 35 and going down to the end of the chapter, what we're going to see here is that Jesus seeks out this man really to confirm his faith, and confirm his belief, and to illustrate the Pharisees' spiritual blindness. So let's jump right in. So we've talked about the purpose of the miracle, the incredulity of the miracle, the strife over the miracle. So I call this segment the master of the miracle. Because if you've noticed, as you've read back over chapter 9, Jesus is in the first several verses when he performs the miracle, and then he's not in chapter 9 at all. It's all about the blind man and really him kind of defending Jesus and defending his experience and interaction with Jesus, even though he doesn't know who Jesus is. And so we come all the way back to the end of the chapter, and that's where Jesus comes back in. It says that the last thing that we talked about in the last segment was that the Pharisees threw this man out of the temple. In verse 34, it says they cast him out. So you have to think about this man and really, like, where's his mind right now at this point in time? How confused he must be, because think about how his day has gone. His day started off just like any other day for him. Not a good situation, but for him it was normal. He starts off blind. He makes his, just like every day that he's known, okay? He, whether he's led to his spot to where he begs, or he's able to make it there by himself, it's just like any other day. He goes to his spot where he begs and calls out for help. And for monetary help, okay? But then his whole world is turned upside down. His whole life is changed when this person who he can't see does something, rubs mud in his eyes, and when he washes the mud off, suddenly he can see perfectly, crystal clear. And so his day's gone from normal, being bad, to life-changing. But then once he is trying to tell people what has happened, his day has really just gotten terrible again, to the point where he's gotten thrown out of the temple because he's defending what happened to him and defending the person who helped him. So here we find that Jesus comes to him, and again, Jesus initiated the miracle, and now Jesus initiates the relationship with this man. It says, Jesus heard that they had cast him out. And when he found him, he said unto him, Dost thou believe on the Son of God? So Jesus comes to find the man. Jesus seeks him out. And then he has this very pointed question for him. He says, do you believe on the Son of God? Now I want you to think about that for a minute. Where does this question come from? Or maybe we should ask, why does Jesus ask it in this way? Because think about that title for Jesus, Son of God, That hasn't come up yet in this chapter. And it's doubtful that this man has heard that title yet. So we'll talk about this a little bit more here in a moment. But as far as we can tell, this man doesn't know this title unless he's heard somewhat about Jesus. There is the fact that the Pharisees had kind of publicized it, that anyone following Jesus was going to be thrown out of the temple. And so that's what eventually happened to this man. That's what his parents were afraid of, if you remember. So Jesus asked him this question. It's very direct. Think about this. The man already believes that Jesus is from God, and at the very least, he's a prophet. And so Jesus is asking him here, not just does he just believe in him as a prophet, but does he believe in him? Does he believe in Jesus as God, as the Messiah? Jesus he asks it this way for a reason. He has a reason for asking it this specific way. It's a very pointed question. Now, there's the man's answer in verse 36. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But he answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him?" Let's look then at Jesus' revelation of himself, or Jesus revealing himself. Jesus said unto him, "Thou hast both seen him, and he it is that talks with thee." It's a pretty profound thought that Jesus says, "You've seen him." The man asks, Who is he? Who is he that I might believe? And Jesus says, "You've seen him." You wonder how long Jesus let that hang in the air. He says, you've both seen him, and it's him that's talking to you. And so you have to wonder what's going on in the man's mind when Jesus says that. Because think about this. Hours before this man had never seen anything. His world was darkness. His world was blindness. He had never seen anything. So when he says, "Who is he, Lord?" and Jesus says, "You've seen him," you have to think about what's the wheels turning in his head. Maybe he has that light bulb moment. He says, "I've seen him. Where? I haven't been able to see." Oh. And then Jesus confirms what he's thinking. It's he that speaks to you. Now, I have a little assignment for you here because I want to talk about the man's path of belief. Okay, this man who is formerly blind. So here's the assignment. I want you to pause the video and do this. I want you to go back through chapter 9, and I want you to write down the statements that the man makes about Jesus. Okay, so pause the video, go back to chapter 9, write down the statements that the man makes about Jesus. Okay, I hope you took the time to do that. It's a profitable exercise. It's good to make yourself go through that. So let's trace that. Hopefully we have all the same answers here. The path of the man's belief. If you go back to verse 11, when people say, "How were your eyes opened?" all he knows about Jesus, he says, "A man that is called Jesus." Okay, so that's his identification. This man named Jesus put clay on my eyes. Okay, so a man called Jesus. When he's further questioned, the Pharisees ask him, "Well, who do you think this man is?" And he says, verse 17, I'll just read the verse. "They say unto the blind man again, What sayest thou of him that he hath opened thine eyes? He said, He's a prophet." So he's a man called Jesus, and then he's a prophet. And then when you really get down to, you go down into verse 30, and then down to verse 33, where he's really kind of defending what he believes has happened and what he knows has happened. Of Jesus, he says, "If this man were not of God, he could do nothing." So he's gone from a man called Jesus, he's a prophet, he must be of God. So his thought that Jesus is a prophet is confirmed in his mind as he thinks on it and as he's questioned on it. Okay, the Pharisees keep badgering him, and as they are questioning him, the reality and what he knows about Scripture is getting cemented in his mind about who Jesus is. And he keeps on going through stages about who he believes Jesus is. He's a good person. He healed me. He's a prophet. He's approved by God. So when we go back to verse 35 through 37, when Jesus asked him, "Do you believe on the Son of God?" His faith needs to go a little bit farther. Okay? So when Jesus asks that question, as we talked about, he specifies himself as God's son, meaning he is God, meaning he's the Messiah. And that's the question for the man. So I want you to notice a couple more things here about this man's belief. One, there's the heart to believe, okay? Because in verse 36, he says, he answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him?" So he has a desire to believe. He has a desire to know who Jesus is, who the Son of God is. So his heart is there, that I might believe. Jesus says, "Thou hast both seen him, and he it is that talketh with thee." Verse 38, the man said, "Lord, I believe." So his heart is there, and then he makes that statement, "I believe," which tells you that it's a statement that's coming from his heart. It's a statement that's coming from what he believes to be true. But then there's also, I put it like this, the action of his belief. Because he said, "Lord, I believe," verse 38, and he worshiped him. There's probably different ways that we could think about this, and it's kind of an interesting question to think about. What does it mean when it says that he worshiped him? Did he just bow down in front of him? Is he grasping at Jesus? Did he grab him in a bear hug? I don't know. It says, but he worshiped him. But the heart there, I think, is what is important. The heart spills out into his actions. Because when he worships him, he ascribes worth to Jesus. So as this narrative is closed, in verses 39 through 41, it's almost as if this whole situation it's had multiple purposes, because it's going to serve to illustrate, the healing of the blind man is going to serve to illustrate the spiritual blindness that is existing in Israel. And it's the faith of the man contrasted with the spite and the unbelief that the Pharisees show. And really it shows where Israel is at as a whole. There's some people who believe in Jesus, but there's so many of the people who are offended by Jesus. So let's talk here for a moment, as Jesus does, on spiritual sight and spiritual blindness. So verses 39 through 41. Jesus said, "For judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind." You say, whoa, that's like kind of a confusing statement, okay? Let's break it down and talk through it here a little bit. As we do that, we'll note by verse 40 that there is still people around, and maybe this was right outside the temple, and so there's Pharisees who, as they've seen Jesus come up to the man, they've kind of started drawing close too, because as the conversation is here with the man, there's people still there observing and listening, because then the Pharisees are going to ask this question in verse 40. But let's talk about Jesus' statement in verse 39. Jesus says, "For judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, and they which see might be made blind." What does he mean by that? Okay, now Jesus has previously said that he did not come into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. But think about this. Jesus' presence alone judges how people react to him, if that makes sense. Jesus' presence judges the world, meaning that people who are spiritually blind can see. So Jesus has come for spiritual blindness to be healed. But Jesus' presence also blinds the prideful and the obstinate people. I hope that makes sense to you. I believe that's what Jesus means here. He says, for judgment I am come into this world, that they which are blind might see, and that they which see might be made blind. So Jesus has come for blindness to be healed, but for pride and obstinance to be blinding. And that's further illustrated by the Pharisees here. Because really, these last two verses are talking about this Pharisees' spiritual status. Because they ask, in verse 40, it says, "And some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words and said unto him, Are we blind also?" So they're asking here, we're not blind too, are we? Surely Jesus wouldn't call the religious elite, he would not call them spiritually blind. I think if you've read, you know the answer. And since we've studied the Pharisees, you also know the answer. That they do not think that they are spiritually blind. In fact, they think they have no blind spots. They think they are just fine. They think they are right. They think that Jesus is wrong. Everything that they do and all of their actions show that they are blind to their own spiritual state. And that's why Jesus says in verse 41, Jesus said unto them, "If ye were blind, ye should have no sin. But now ye say, We see, therefore your sin remains." Jesus answers, listen, you think you're fine, and that shows that you're not. So their pride and their obstinance keeps them in spiritual blindness. They are unwilling to change. They're unwilling to consider who Jesus is. They're unwilling to change their minds at all. And that is keeping them spiritually blind. Now for us, I think, we're not supposed to live we're not supposed to live in a mindset of constantly beating ourselves up and, well, we're not good enough for God. We're not good enough for God. We're terrible people. But at the same time, that is true. We should be realizing that we are no good on our own. The only good that comes from us is because of Christ, because of Jesus and the work that he does in our hearts. Without Jesus, we're lost. And there's really nothing eternally good that comes from us. And that's what the Pharisees need to see here. That without Jesus, without real righteousness, without God's righteousness, they're nothing. And that's what we need to realize too, that without Jesus' righteousness, we are nothing. The Pharisees are blind spiritually. They think that they are okay, and that shows that they need God. It's a wonderful, I say wonderful, and it is, because it's a wonderful truth that we all have to learn and wrap our minds around. We are no good on our own. It's Jesus who makes us good, who gives us value, who gives us an identity, who gives us the ability to have lasting eternal impact. It's all because of Jesus and the work that he does in our lives. If we think that we are okay on our own, that's where there's spiritual blindness that we need to address. So that wraps up chapter 9. I hope that's some things for you to think about. I hope that's some things for you to consider, maybe even pray about, okay? I'm looking forward for all of us to be back together. We'll be back together in just under a week here, and it'll be good to have the youth group back together, to have new members of the youth group together, and to grow together and get back on track together as a church. So I hope this video series has been a blessing to you, and we'll look to continue in John next week at youth group. All right, thanks for watching.